She had no rank that the United States Army would recognize. She held no title in the language of the men hunting her people across the desert Southwest. What she had was a reputation that traveled ahead of her through the Apache Wars, the woman who knew where the soldiers were before they arrived. The woman Apache leaders brought with them when the fighting started. The woman who crossed a flooding river alone with a mescalero mother and newborn to carry them to safety, who guided refugees through territory the cavalry couldn't follow, who fought at her brother's side until there was no one left to fight beside. Her name was Lozen. Most people have never heard it. The Apache remembered her as a prophet and a warrior. The historical record mostly forgot she existed. That is not an accident. That is how history treats the women who refuse to disappear quietly. Welcome back to Medusa Awakened, where we unearth the voices they tried to bury. Lozen was born into the Cheyenne band of the Chiricahua Apache, likely in the 1840s, into a world that was being systematically taken apart by American expansion into the Southwest. She grew up inside a war that had no end she could see and no terms she could accept. The land was going. The people who had lived on it for generations were being driven onto reservations or hunted until there were not enough of them left to fight. She was the sister of Victorio, one of the most skilled Apache war leaders of the 19th century, and whatever gifts she was born with, she developed them inside the specific pressure of a people watching their world contract around them with no sign it would stop. Apache tradition held that she had received a sacred gift during the coming-of-age ceremony known as the sunrise dance, a power of perception that connected her to the movement of enemies. The specific ritual involved raising her arms, turning slowly, sensing changes in her palms when enemies were near, the direction and intensity pointing toward the threat. Whether this is understood as spiritual gift, extraordinary sensory awareness, or something in between, the people who traveled with her treated the information as reliable. In a war they were losing, reliable information was not a comfort. It was the difference between the band surviving another day and not. Lozen possessed it. She did not hesitate to use it. The soldiers who were looking for her people frequently found them gone before they arrived. And the Apache bands that survived the longest were those who took seriously what she told them. She did not occupy the role that Apache women were expected to occupy in a time of war. But the Apache were running out of people they could trust with the positions that mattered most. She chose not to marry. She learned to fight when women of her generation were not expected to train as warriors. She rode. She shot. She participated in raids. She became, by the testimony of people who traveled alongside her, genuinely dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with legend and everything to do with competence, under conditions that would have broken most people. Victorio trusted her judgment the way he trusted very few others. When the band moved through hostile territory, she rode at the edges where contact would come first. When he needed information about what lay ahead, he listened to what she said. She was not a ceremonial presence, and she was not a symbolic one. She was the person he wanted closest when the situation was most serious. And as the Apache Wars wore on, and the bands lost more fighters and more ground and more of the people who had once held the line, the situations that were most serious kept getting worse. She had refused the ordinary life. What she had chosen instead was the front line, at a moment when the front line meant something specific and terrible. Outnumbered, pursued, fighting to keep alive what could be kept alive before the rest of it was gone. Her people called her a holy warrior. The army records of the time didn't know what to call her, because the category of a woman who fought at this level was not one they had prepared paperwork for. She made their categories irrelevant by continuing to fight regardless of what they said. A warrior is defined by what she does. By that definition, there was no question about what Lozen was. The Apache Wars stretched across decades and caused enormous casualties on both sides. But the cost to the Apache was existential in ways it was never existential for the United States. The bands were being pushed off land they had occupied for generations, hunted across desert terrain, forced onto reservations, under conditions that combined deliberate deprivation with the systematic suppression of everything that made Apache life coherent. Victorio's band refused San Carlos. They had heard from people who were already there, and what they heard was not survivable in the ways that mattered most. The breakout of 1879 began a running conflict across New Mexico, Texas, and northern Mexico that involved some of the most grueling desert warfare in American military history. Lozen was in it, not as a witness. As someone Victorio reportedly described as worth more than most of his warriors, because she saw what they couldn't see and did not flinch when what she saw required action. The army brought thousands of soldiers, professional trackers, and the full weight of military resources to bear on Apache bands who were outnumbered, outgunned, and learning the calculus of modern warfare under fire. Lozen gave them something no general could purchase. Warning: the Apache bands that listened stayed alive. The ones that ignored what she said did not always have the same luck. If you believe history remembers conquerors while forgetting the women who resisted them, subscribe to Medusa Awakened. Together we uncover what history tried to erase. In 1880, Lozen was absent from her brother's side for one of the only documented times. She had gone to help a Mescalero woman deliver her child safely, guiding the mother across a flooding river, carrying the infant herself through territory the cavalry controlled. She made it. While she was doing this, Victorio's band was ambushed at Tres Castillos in Mexico. Victorio was killed. Most of the band died with him. The woman who had functioned as his most trusted protector and most reliable source of warning was not there. She had been somewhere else, doing something that the story of warrior women rarely makes room for: keeping a mother and child alive in the dark. She had been carrying a life into the world at the exact moment her people were losing theirs. That is the kind of detail history usually omits, because it doesn't fit the way history prefers to tell its stories about war. The timing is one of the most devastating ironies in the entire record of the Apache Wars. She survived. She rejoined the remaining Apache under the elderly warrior Nana, and later allied with Geronimo. She continued fighting. She was present at the final surrender in 1886. She was taken as a prisoner of war to Florida. She died there of tuberculosis in 1889. She had survived the war. She did not survive what peace looked like for a prisoner on the wrong side of American expansion. Lozen's name survived not in army records, but in the oral tradition of the Apache, who had traveled with her and fought alongside her and watched her do things they could not fully explain. Historians who documented Apache accounts in the 20th century encountered her consistently, described with a precision and reverence that decades had not diminished. She appears as someone trusted completely, whose trust had been earned not through ceremony, but through repeated action under conditions that left no room for anything less than genuine competence. History forgot her name. The Apache did not. The record she left was not written in the language of the people who won the war. It was kept in the memory of people who refused to disappear, who carried what they knew through imprisonment and displacement, and every form of pressure the victors applied to make them forget. Lozen chose to be essential rather than invisible at the only moment when those were the choices available. She was a warrior. She was a prophet in the way her people understood that word. She was a woman who faced the end of her world and refused to go quietly into whatever the victors had prepared. And the soldiers who were hunting her people sometimes arrived to find nothing but tracks, and the desert, and no one alive who could explain why they always seemed to be one step too late. History remembered the war. It almost forgot one of its greatest warriors. The Apache never did, neither should we.